Hello and welcome to the GZERO World Podcast. This is where you can find extended versions of my conversations on public television. I'm Ian Bremmer, and today's episode was taped in front of a live audience at the 92nd Street Y in New York City, where I sat down with one of the most battle-tested figures in American politics and foreign policy, Rahm Emanuel. He's worn more than a few hats in public office: Democratic Party enforcer, U.S. Congressman, White House Chief of Staff under Obama, Mayor of Chicago, and most recently, U.S. Ambassador to Japan, where he was deeply involved in America's Indo-Pacific strategy. But this conversation isn't just about politics. It's about power and how American foreign policy is being reshaped in real time, because the world looks very different than it did just a year ago. President Trump is, of course, back in office, and his foreign policy approach of might is right is playing out most dramatically in Iran. U.S. and Israeli strikes have escalated into a broader regional conflict, with Iranian retaliation hitting Gulf allies and threatening global energy markets. At the same time, Trump's own objectives are shifting. Early calls for regime change in Iran have faded. Demands around leadership and political outcomes have been scaled back, and what counts as victory for President Trump may not be quite the same as for Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu. And from what I'm hearing from allied leaders, there is real concern, not just about the war itself, but about the decision-making behind it. Some describe a president who appears, in their words, increasingly disconnected from reality in the middle of a major foreign policy crisis. So I spoke with Rahm Emanuel about what this moment means for America's alliances, for its global standing, and for its domestic politics with the 2026 midterms looming. Because war may be hell, but politically, November is looking gruesome for POTUS. So let's get to it. Here's my conversation with Rahm Emanuel, live in front of a 92nd Street Y audience.
The GZERO World Podcast is brought to you by our lead sponsor, Prologis. Prologis helps businesses across the globe scale their supply chains with an expansive portfolio of logistics real estate and the only end-to-end solutions platform addressing the critical initiatives of global logistics today. Learn more at prologis.com.
I'm looking forward to this a lot. Rahm, got to start with the Middle East, of course.
What a surprise.
Shocking.
Yeah.
We've got a stoppage in the Strait of Hormuz. I don't see a plan to end it anytime soon. If you were offering advice to the commander-in-chief today, just today, never mind, we'll get to how they started all of this, but today you would say what?
So look, here's the point that I think you got to do. And I thought they started this, but every time they look like they're coming back to a more narrow, more focused set of objectives, the president or the prime minister sets out regime change and a political objective, and you're forcing a regime against their will. And they're back against the wall. And therefore, they have no other choice but to continue this. And also, you know the famous line, you know this, Ian, which is, you know, when you start a war, the other side gets a vote. Well, that's also true about ceasefires or peace. They get a vote too. And they have found all our vulnerabilities. We have found their vulnerabilities as well in this process. And I think that the best thing the president can do is have degraded them to a point that goes back to where I think he should have started this if you were going to start it. That's a different question, which is this on the nuclear capacity, this on the intercontinental ballistic missiles, this on the delivery, and this on the terrorist organizations throughout the region. We have degraded them to the potential that they backed off, and here's what we're going to do on the oil and energy. The problem is now is how to come out of this without Iran. Our threat used to be Iran was going to develop and make a rush for the nuclear weapon. Today, they have veto control over the Strait of Hormuz. And that's why the Gulf country says you're not ending this till that veto is eliminated.
The Gulf states also want the Americans to continue. And, you know, Trump owns this.
Let's dial this back just a bit. The Gulf countries did not want this. They wanted serenity and order. They were prospering with that. They're also having spent some of my life in the region, they're not happy you got a Qatari jet. We invested in all your family's different businesses, and our voices are nothing, and the Prime Minister walks in and you agree with him, and we don't get any vote in this process.
The Israeli Prime Minister.
Yeah, the Israeli Prime Minister. And so, to me, they're furious. So therefore, they've now said, okay, you started this. We didn't want this. We didn't get listened to. We didn't get asked. You ignored us. You have to finish it.
And finishing it, in your view, means what?
It's not my view. Well, my view, which is also relevant to their view, which is they cannot have a veto over the Strait of Hormuz. They cannot have it. It's unacceptable.
And
so remember,
change, that means what?
Well, this is my point, which is, I mean, to go back to this is, had the president addressed the country, not in an 8-minute video on his Truth Social, but address the country where you're about to put men and women at risk. In the Oval Office, the seriousness of this is the most serious decision a commander-in-chief will make. He should have said, once he makes this decision, that's a different thing in the debate about this decision, I wanted this resolved at the negotiating table. I spent months with my team at the table trying to seek a solution to their nuclear capacity, their missile delivery capacity, and their desire to create chaos throughout the region.
Support proxies across the region.
Yeah, well, terrorist organizations.
Yep, absolutely.
Syria, Hezbollah, Hamas, and Houthis. And I spent time at that table to seek a deal that worked for Iran and worked for us. 80% accurate, but he could have said that. It would have, given a foundation. Europe, who's at risk, would have said he was at the negotiating table. You can judge whether you thought he was serious at the table or not. He spent time, and people spent time. In fact, there was a Thursday meeting set up before the bombing.
In Istanbul, that's
yeah.
Right. Yeah.
And so he could have said, I wanted this resolved there. I told the Iranians, which is true if you go back early in his tenure, about a month into the tenure, I would love to see a negotiated deal. I wanted that, but I also believed in the American word. And every president before me said, Iran will never have a nuclear weapon, and all options are on the table. And the American word, when it gives it, is worth defending. Now, this decision, put aside, I'm not for this decision, etc. This decision, you could have created a structure and an argument. He launches off into regime change and a political objective that never can be achieved at 25,000 feet up in the air. An objective that the American people are questioning seriously, which is, why are we doing this? Your military actually is accomplishing this strategic goal. You have added on a political dimension that is going to take literally a victory.
So, Rahm, your statement is clear.
The statement that the president should have done.
If he had made that statement, is that statement consistent with the decision to decapitate and assassinate the supreme leader, or that speech would have had to be made with a different set of military objectives?
Listen, we are the superpower. At no time should there have been a decision to basically make this political in any measure. It should not, because it can't be accomplished. And the only thing the American people, and they have real doubts, and they have every reason to have doubts, is why are we doing regime change? If you wanted to achieve stuff, you could have said this. Now, put aside, let me say one thing. It's pretty clear from the UK security officer who was at the negotiations and other reporting that Iran was offering very serious compromises on each of those buckets of issues. This was a war absolutely of choice. This is a war of choice. And that's why, going back to your first question, the Gulf countries have said, you didn't ask, we gave you our advice, we told you not to do this, now that you do this, you have to finish the job.
The Europeans are saying, you didn't ask our advice, you didn't even tell us about it, now we're not going to help you.
Well, one, the Europeans/NATO, it's a kind of, first, if it's a defensive organization, this is not defensive. Second is, you have literally spent a year belittling allies. You've been ridiculing them, saying they're small, they're minor, they're petty. In the time of need, this is why we have allies. We spread not only the burden, we are stronger because we have allies. Now the price of that kind of politics is coming home to roost.
Now,
and I want to say this also. We were slightly talking about this earlier. One, whatever you want to say, whether it was a real or not, the UK has said it, others have said it, there was a real offer, which is why the Prime Minister of Israel rushes and makes an emergency trip to D.C. on a fear that the president would take that offer.
Now, I need to ask you about that because, of course, the director of counterterrorism working in the United States doesn't just resign, but resigns with this spectacular claim that the Israelis and their supporters in the United States are the reason the U.S. is in this war. It's not in American national interest. You know that the Prime Minister of Israel has been around the block many, many times, has been pushing for major military operations in Iran for quite a while. How do you respond to those charges?
Well, first of all, it's well documented, we don't have a very good relationship, the Prime Minister and I. So that's well documented, which I wear as a badge of honor. And it's all over housing in the West Bank. We got into a big fight in the Oval Office, et cetera. That said, the Prime Minister has a right, he says what he says. It's on the president to make a decision. The Prime Minister asked Joe Biden, Barack Obama, Donald Trump 1, George Bush. I think you can go as far back as Bill Clinton, but definitely the first, every one of them said no. Every one of them. If to say that this is on the Prime Minister means you're absolving the President of the United States of any agency, I'm sorry. We have a system, you get X amount of electoral votes, you put your hand on the Bible, you raise the other hand, and you take an oath as Commander-in-Chief. The idea that somebody else told him to do this and he puts America's reputation, its future, its men and women. There is a man who now has 2 7-month-olds who will never see their father. On that fireplace mantle will be an American flag in a wooden triangle. There will be a seat at that those twins' home that will always be empty. The best of America is in our armed forces. That's the true 1%. You are the commander-in-chief. You are responsible for them. When you make this decision, it's your decision. It's the most difficult decision a president makes. To say that somebody else made it for him is ridiculous. And the Prime Minister has talked for years about war against Iran, and every president, when they look at it, weigh it out and say, that's not the risk. Now, they've done cyber. They've done other things to disrupt Iran. They've come to agreements with Iran. This decision was made by the Commander-in-Chief of the United States of America. And to say somebody else read it says that he has no agency. And I don't accept that.
There are 5,000 American troops that are on their way to the Persian Gulf.
Yes.
And including?
From Asia.
From Asia. So, certainly there is a lot of talk about deployment. There's talk about taking out the enriched uranium stockpiles. There's talk about taking out Karg Island, where 90% of the oil goes. You think that there should, under any circumstances, be a ground deployment here?
Okay. One is, you focused on the troops appropriately. We took a THAAD anti-missile system out of South Korea, and just the other day, North Korea fired off 10 new missiles. I don't know which missiles they were testing. I didn't catch that, but there's more than just, there's Marines moving, there's a battleship, and I think the strike force moving. There's also a THAAD system, and North Korea is acting up.
And that THAAD system was put in with a lot of pressure of the United States, and the South Koreans took a big economic hit from China to accept that system.
3 years of economic coercion and boycott of their major supermarket in the Chinese market.
Yep.
So there's many resources where we are stealing from Peter to pay Paul. That Marine group, which I know about from Japan, is a front Marine group. They're sent in to do something. Now, whether that's for not every Marine group is sent in to do something, but to basically clear an area, take hold of an area. If that's, whether it's a message sending or a preparation, I'm not part of any of the war plans or conversation, nor are you, but you can only guess what it's for.
And again, if we were to see that deployment happen, we were to see ground troops there. You say, any circumstances under which you could see supporting that?
I suppose the other thing is the recent bombing using the 5,000-pound may have also been in preparation of something else. We'd be guessing, but these are a lot of resources being moved to an area that have clear intent and purpose as it relates to the island and the oil, and the ability of Iran to sustain itself economically and to create the United States create leverage so they don't have a veto power over passage in the Strait of Hormuz.
Now, there is a lot of stretch. There's stretch from Asia. There's stretch from weapons that are being sold to Europe for Ukraine.
Yeah.
And the Ukrainians now are providing interceptors and drone expertise to the Gulf states.
1 year ago, this is not what you want to be prescient on, but...
It's the Washington Post?
Yeah, Washington Post.
Yeah.
It was about 2 weeks before that infamous President Zelensky visit. And I said the President of the United States is asking for mineral rights. He's asking for the wrong thing.
First of all, this is when he's thrown out and not given lunch, you remember,
It's one of the many theatrics in the Oval. But I wrote that don't ask for mineral rights, ask for their drone technology. They produce new drone technology every 4 weeks. We can't get an RFP out of the Pentagon in 4 years. And they have their ability in battle, not only, I mean, literally in real time, the Ukrainians are taking technology, something happens in the battle, it gets a new company, and they're producing new companies, new technology, new software, new capacity. They just had their first drone with no Chinese products, not something that we can do. So you're asking for the wrong thing. And then, we learned this earlier in the week, if not over the weekend, 6 months ago, the Pentagon had a meeting with them on this, and they said, we don't need your technology. And now you have the situation, we can't get it fast enough, et cetera. And I do believe this, and this and this gets to a separate subject, but they're all integrated. The President of the United States, by taking sanctions off of Russia on their oil, and then you have a friend that you belittled and made fun of is offering you drones that protect your troops. Russia, now that you've taken sanctions off, Russia has given intel to kill American soldiers. This president does not know the difference between friend and foe. Does not know the difference. The Ukrainians in the last 2 months have taken 225,000 square miles back from the Russians occupied. They have done it with new drone technology that came up. They have thinned out the ability not only on the Russian lines, but 70 miles from the lines. Russian cannot supply it. And you have a country who is providing technology to kill American servicemen. You're the commander-in-chief. Do you know friend from foe?
When he was asked about the targeting of American troops, American facilities, his response to that was, well, the Russians say that we do that too. The United States is providing intelligence, of course, to the Ukrainians that allows them to strike more deeply into Russian territory. The U.S. continues to do that under Trump. That was his response. Yeah. What's a better response?
Corporal Bone Spur has never found an opportunity to not undermine American intelligence. And I say this, but this is not the first time he's thrown American intelligence under the bus and gone with Russia. One of the things we know for a fact, given our intelligence we made public during the early days pre the Russian invasion on February 22nd, 2022, people gained around the world massive respect for the capability of the United States intelligence. You have a commander-in-chief who at no time doesn't miss an opportunity to undermine it. Xi is furious that his own intelligence didn't know what the Americans knew. We know that. Europe, who said the Americans were wrong, including Zelensky, now know the American intelligence was superior and accurate to the date, the time, and the hour.
They were telling him in advance, you have to prepare for this.
Yeah, and Zelensky
was not buying it.
But basically 72 to 96 hours, wherever you want to start it.
Now the Russians...
And the question is, does what he wants with Cuba, which I think is, his scalp, and he can go around and say that, or does he basically curry favor? And I think Putin's not doing this. This is not a guy known to just call an audible.
It's a test.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Now, let's face it. The Iranians are not winning here, right? No one would want to be in Iran's position. They've got leverage, but they're also, this is desperation. The Russians in the last 3 weeks have been winning. The Russians are getting more of their oil out. The Russians have American sanctions that are being suspended. For now it's temporary. The Russians are getting individuals having their sanctions taken off of them, which is of no benefit to the oil industry whatsoever. Their economy had been much more trouble. They're major beneficiaries.
$150 million a day. They're more net. So
should the Americans take that hit? Because, I mean, it is more cost at the pump, but at the end of the day, you're trying to put the Russians under pressure.
So you also have to add, let's widen the lens here. Russia, for the last 5 months, was falling behind on the replacement of dead soldiers. They were losing 35,000, either wounded or dead, a month. They were staying current. They're now behind. First 6 months. Second, Starlink was cut. Third, Ukraine has not only made more ground, but they're hitting deeper in capability, and it's actually hurting them economically.
Yes.
Not only the Strait of Hormuz, but the president on his sanctions has gotten Russia's economy off its knees. It was military on its knees. Now he's gotten, but that hasn't changed, but he's gotten their oil and the flow of the money into the economy off their knees.
And Ukraine's air defenses are going to be more stressed as a consequence.
Well, there's not going to be Patriots. There's not going to be the type of weapons that we thought we were going to have. I mean, this is a side note, totally separate, because I battled with the U.S. Mitsubishi in Japan is contracted to make 30, they can make up to 35. They have the capacity to make up to 200 Patriots a year. Only country that has the capacity to ramp up. We make 600. We need to get to 2,000. And worked with our defense industry as ambassador to give the technology, on an agreement, would never do it. And we are being exposed at how, this was something I talked about endlessly as ambassador, our military industrial complex is not ready for the modern age. It is not ready. You're sending men and women out on missions on behalf of our national interests and national security interests. Not only do we not have the weapon systems, we do not have the capacity, whether it's a jet, whether it's a missile, THAADs, Patriots, AMRAAMs, all the pieces that you need. And I said it publicly 15 months ago. No stock buyback by any military company until they get their operations in place. I'm going to give you a fact. Raytheon and Lockheed do, on average, $18 billion in stock buyback a year and $4 billion in capital expenditure. And it until the corporate suite gets their head focused on solving this problem.
U.S. military overstretch right now.
It's overstretched. We fund 2 nuclear subs every year for the last decade. We produce 1.2. Don't get into 0.2. Whatever you do, don't get. And why? They're over budget, behind schedule. Not a year, every year for the last decade. We're down. We know we need Patriots. We know we need THAADs. We don't produce them.
I want to move to Asia because you've been spending time there. And let's face it, the Russians, as much as they were on their knees, they are not a high-performing military right now.
No.
Not in their region, not globally. The Iranians are certainly not a high-performing military.
No.
The Chinese, on the other hand, are building like crazy, and they're increasingly technologically sophisticated. The message that the Americans are sending to top allies in the region, to Japan, to South Korea, to Australia, is can't count on the United States right now. So what do you do?
So one of the things is, I've been strong about China, but I do want to remind you, they're spending a lot of money. They did have a submarine that went to the bottom of the river. It was sitting on the dock, just dropped. They found that in the missile system, they were putting not fuel, but water. They have some issues. They're thinking about the Taiwan Straits, correct?
Sure. And the South China Sea.
Well, that's, in my view, more serious, but we'll get to that judgment. When was the last time China fought a naval war? Never. So, and the reason Xi's doing what he's doing, because he's rolling the dice on this thing. He's rolling his entire tenure, his reputation. And his military last real effort was 1979. Now, you can say whatever you want about Venezuela, what we're doing in Iran, etc. That's a political judgment and a judgment worth having a debate about, which is what we're discussing. Don't think for a second the Chinese walk away, they have low inventory, which we do. They are seeing the capacity here. They saw what we did in Venezuela. both satellite, cyber, air, naval integration capacity. Don't be so sure he walked away and said, "Oh, I got a better team."
I don't know.
I think he walks. Well, you can, but I think he looks at what we've done, and and also our intelligence back in Ukraine. Don't assume that he thinks the U.S. military, that he didn't walk away and said with a bit of envy and respect for what the military has been able to pull.
I understand that. Why does he not also look at the United States and say, these people have a glass jaw. They've got a great military, but they can't tolerate pain. We saw that with the critical minerals. They thought they were going to win, and we showed them that we've been investing, and immediately they cry uncle. And now on Iran, tiny little country doesn't have military capacity, and as soon as they close the strait, suddenly it's like, oh my God, what are we going to do? Yeah. Why does that not embolden the Chinese?
As you know, everybody looks, it does. But they look at all of this.
Of course.
They also,
you put one
one is the military, you look at that. They also, Xi looks at this, does look at the short term, but there's also the biggest analysis that he has with his top political advisor is that America is divided at home and incapable of governing. What they worry about is a focused, determined America. They see our political dysfunction, his top political right. I'm telling you what's in the public domain. The biggest problem for America is its internal domestic divisions. And I used to say this as ambassador. Nothing China does scares me. It's what we don't do here at home that scares me. If we don't take care of business here and start solving these problems, that is a bigger threat to us than China looking around and says, oh, America has a glass jaw. That's a part of the equation. That's not the equation.
Not the equation.
No, it's a part of the equation in the same way that the strength of the military is part of the equation.
I did want to at least ask a question or two about, before we go to questions from the audience, about the United States, since we're turning there. Recent report from VDEM, which is a pretty reputable group, tracks democracy, came out today, says that the United States is sliding into authoritarianism faster than Turkey or Hungary. It was this morning. Do you agree with that assessment?
Well, look, Hungary's about to have an election, and I think they're going to turn. That's number one. And I think if you look at the reform candidate...
2 weeks away.
Yeah. I think, here's how I'd answer in my analysis. The institutions, free press, judicial system, you can go through other institutions, even the universities, take a look at Harvard, et cetera, they're holding up. The people in those institutions, not so much. And I think the biggest piece of this institution that I think is holding up American democracy, the American people. They are the thin blue line. And I'm not saying, no, I mean, seriously, they're going to issue a referendum on this president and the Republicans.
In a few months.
Yes. And it's unambiguous. Fact. There have been 13 statewide elections since November 2024. Democrats are 13 for 13. Won them all. There have been 9 state legislative seats that have flipped. Democrats are 9 for 9. The American people are the thin blue line protecting the democratic system. That's A. You look at the lower courts, I'm going to make the lower court judges Time Magazine Person of the Year. The Supreme Court, you're lucky if you get the inside advertisement. I'm not joking. The lower court judges have been outstanding from Democratic Republican presidents about the law. Now, I will also say this. To corporate America, you are timid souls. He's destroying the greatest research system the world has ever seen. Not a word, not a chirp. He's decided that it's a rule of one man, not the rule of law. I don't know how you think you're making money or businesses without the rule of law. Not a word, nothing. You're intimidated. What do you have an organization for? You don't want to be an individual company? Have an organization speak up. Nothing. So do I think the institutions, yes, the people in them, as my grandmother would say, not so great.
You're listening to the GZERO World with Ian Bremmer podcast, your weekly geopolitical deep dive into the world's biggest news stories, featuring in-depth conversations with global leaders and newsmakers. To get more of GZERO's insights on global politics every morning, sign up for our free newsletter, GZERO Daily, at gzeromedia.com.
How do you, if you look ahead to 2028 for a second, if you're the Democrats, what's the most likely way they blow it?
Being Democrats. Look, there's a lot of people, let me use this as an anecdote, as a joke, but to make, not a joke, but to make a point. Some people, there's a group among Democrats, don't fill out all these questionnaires. Well, the questionnaire is not the problem. It's your answers that are the problem. I've said this before. I'm one of the things, being ambassador, 8,000 miles away, 12 hours away. I was watching, I learned more about America being away. I was like, what is going on, especially for the Democratic Party? And there is a lesson, President Obama, President Clinton, President Kennedy. The common theme when President Obama's own pastor said certain things, he gives a speech, very clear, unambiguous, a moral speech about why his pastor, his own pastor, was wrong. It's been shortchanged. President Clinton at Operation Push gives a speech known as the Sister Soldier speech about why killing police officers, white people, is not right. It's wrong. President Kennedy goes down to Texas in the middle of the campaign and says, I will not be a Catholic president that takes direction from the Pope. They normalized themselves and showed strength in their own family. And then two, they not only had middle-class values, but they had middle-class economics. I've said this before, and I'll say it again. We spent 2 years communicating to people that we were worried about bathroom access and locker room access, and we never focused on classroom excellence. 50% of our kids today cannot read at grade level, and not a word. 50%. What makes you think fourth grade is going to get easier after third grade? You can't read. You know more about the president's position on windmills. Never commented on it. No governor said we needed an emergency meeting to discuss this and figure out. And in Mississippi, where I went, they have an answer. And the party needs to remember, not what any one individual interest group is, what is the interest of the American people and the ability to communicate not only their anxieties, but their hopes and their dreams. The one thing I'm optimistic about 2028, look, we have had two presidents that have talked about restoring a past that's not coming back. We need to get on the business of talking about a future we need to build that matters to everybody. And that is the most important thing Democrats do. If they get caught in the cultural cul-de-sac again, running around, getting themselves wrapped around an ankle, the American people will make a judgment. So what you got to do is not fall into the traps. You have three examples from Kennedy, Clinton, and Obama, of how to win. Don't try to rewrite a new playbook. It existed and it's worked from the three most successful presidents we've had.
I love talking about policy. I love talking about the future. I also recognize that the institutions are presently under attack.
Yes.
And you and I agree that there is resilience in those institutions, but we cannot ignore the fact that 2026, 2028 are also going to be about how do you protect those institutions. So how do you deliver that message as well?
Well, first of all, 2026 is a referendum election. Every time a party controls both sides of Pennsylvania Avenue, 1994, 2006, 2010, 2018, it's a referendum. 2028 is a choice election. We need to have I'm not saying the institutions don't matter. The institutions don't matter if your kid, having gone to school and college, is living in the basement and has no prospect of getting out. When you sell that house, the kid comes with it and his laundry.
That sounds unappetizing.
It is. Look, and you got to understand that family's anger. They saved for the education. They were told and they bought the concept that if you go to college, you got a ticket to a passport to the future. And I'll give you one example of this. I mean this. I come out of college, I make $16,500, and I get an apartment on Cornelia and Halstead in Chicago, 3.25 utilities included. My son graduates UCLA, becomes a naval intel officer. He makes 4 times what his father made, and without housing assistance could not get an apartment. This is messed up. People go to see a doctor, and the insurance company knows one word in the English language: no. Your 401k is not a savings plan. It backstops your paycheck. The thing is broken, and it's rigged against people who work hard, play by the rules. And that's where Democrats need to stay focused, and they need to normalize themselves and be respectful of families. I think like this, I mean, I look at this and I look at some of the debates we had on basic core issues, and we wrapped ourselves around as I jokingly say, we weren't good in the kitchen table. We weren't good in the family room. The only room we actually occupied was the bathroom, and it's the smallest room in the house. This is insane.
Question from the audience. What's one hard truth about America's role in the world that political leaders understand, but that you don't think voters are ready to hear yet?
It's a really good question.
Of all the ones I saw here, was my favorite one to start off with. That was really challenging.
Here's what I would say, and here's also my fix to it. We have a global responsibility. We are a superpower. You don't get to pick, like, what part of the world do you want to be. We're a superpower that has a lot of responsibilities. We have a lot of allies and capabilities. We either have to pull back from the idea and the responsibility of being a superpower, or we have to actually be able to fund what it means to be a superpower, not just militarily.
USAID.
The whole piece of it. And also the economic strength and resilience of this country and our economy here at home. And to be a superpower there's four.
You're right. The people don't want to hear that right now.
I actually think, I grew up at a time where you had, in politics, working for President Clinton, it was a formative part. You had what was called the Graham-Rudman-Hollings, pay as you go. You couldn't add new spending without some revenue capacity. I was very influenced by Neil Ferguson's book about superpowers when interest on the debt exceeds military. I actually think you should pass a law. In no time can the defense budget be below the interest on the payment, interest on the debt. Make it absolute. So one way or another, we're going to get serious about dealing with our fiscal house and have it as a discipline, an enforced discipline. And once that went away at that period of 2000, after President Clinton.
And Rand Paul would probably support that.
But you have to create...
But I'm not sure you'd have another senator.
But to the core, I'm not so sure about that, but to the core, you got to have some leadership out of the Oval Office.
Yeah.
The core piece that the American people don't want to hear is that we're a superpower with superpower responsibilities, and we're living on borrowed time and borrowed money. And that's we can't do it any longer.
So here's a question for both of us.
Okay.
It's always it's kind of fun.
So you get to pick which answer you like.
Yeah, it's great. Are you more optimistic or pessimistic about the United States democratic system over the next 5 years?
I answered it because I believe the American people, I really do believe what I said, which is they're the thin blue line. And I think they are desperate for a politics at work. If I've been all over, I've been in Mississippi, I've been in Iowa, I've been in Nevada, travel the country. I'll be this weekend in Wisconsin. There is a palpable anxiety, correctly, about the future. It is accentuated because people don't think we're taking care of business. I mean, think about it this moment in time. 50% of our kids, they're our children, can't read at grade level. We're in the middle of a war of choice. We've made a decision pretty rapidly. And the Senate is arguing about whether you can do mail-in voting. Of all the issues that you have to focus on right now, that would be 200th out of the top 100. I'm glad you got that joke.
But not for the individual president, of course.
It's not going to happen, but yes. But my point is, and then back to the core, there is this palpable anxiety that what they knew, what they worked for, what they did is slipping, will never be for their children. And the people that are responsible are doing anything but dealing with that. And I actually, look, I could be wrong. And if I decide to run, this is a judge, I actually think the American people are actually ready for an honest, mature discussion about this. Doesn't mean they're going to reward it. That's a different thing. But they want it.
I think more pessimistic because I think we are going to need to experience a crisis of some form. Things are going to have to break so that we can fix them. I think there's too much complacency right now.
It's the person that coined never allow a good crisis to go to waste. And you have a menu of crises. The problem is focusing on which ones you can actually solve.
Yeah, and that's why I was asking you about, what you think about the institutional piece, because I agree that's not the part that the Americans want to hear, want to vote on, but that is the part that's increasingly slipping. So some of those things will break, but long term, I agree with you. I'm still optimistic about the American system. So there you have it. Okay, here's one just for you, but I apparently can opine on it. How do you, Rahm, see the future of American competitiveness with the restrictions in H-1B visa and immigration in general? Thank you.
There's a bill in Congress called the Dignity Act. And it has 21 Republicans and 21 Democrats on an issue that we usually play Hunger Game politics on, out of the House. And it has what to me is the only way to solve this problem, which is we're a nation of laws and we're a nation of immigrants. And you have to adhere to both of those. You can't have one or the other. I think the American people have gotten rightfully, they don't want mayhem in the border and they don't want mayhem on our streets. And you have to construct an answer to this problem so America can move forward. That Dignity Act, in my view, addresses that and also addresses the pure politics. And I want to say this, I'm the person, I've been on all sides. And what I mean by that is I helped for President Clinton design Operation Gatekeeper in San Diego, Operation Safeguard down in Nogales, Arizona, et cetera, the enforcement that we dealt with 94, 95, 96 that worked. When I was mayor, I created free community college. You got to be average, first city to create free community college. Tuition, books, and transportation. I allowed dreamers to get access to it. Yeah. First time dreamers could ever get public funding for education. But also, so I didn't come to this clean hands. When I was chair of the party, GZERO, I ran ads on immigration. So I have both been part of the political problem in trying to resolve a very hard policy issue. I think there is an ability to construct a consensus because we've gone from one end of the podium of the disorder, an open border, no control, to another disorder and mayhem on our streets. I think that this is a place that requires leadership, but I actually think there's a way to deal with this that addresses both, not just H-1B, you can't just take a piece of it out of it, that brings together both a nation of immigrants and a nation of laws and be respectful and adheres to those two principles.
So I'm going to go off-piste here. I like the fact that you talked about the fact that you were a part of the problem. You want to be a part of the solution. You've also been in all
Nobody in politics in the last 30 years
is not part of the problem.
Is in a glass house.
Exactly. That's what I want to ask. So given the fact that you've been in all of these political positions over the course of a period of time when the United States, the average citizen has felt like their system is less responsive, less legitimate, they believe less in their leaders, what's the problem that if you could look back on, you'd say, I wish I had been more outspoken about this. I wish that while I was in these positions, I would have done this differently.
You know, there's this famous spring meeting in the Obama White House. And we passed the Recovery Act, we passed the 10 million children's health care, national, and there's three big priorities: health care, financial reform, and then cap and trade. We had, and to President Obama's great credit, we had a Saturday meeting, I don't know, it was like 5 hours. I remember, you got the financial system still off, you got the auto industry on their knees, et cetera. And I say this because I'm reimagining, we're in the Roosevelt room, President, we're over here, the Vice President, I'm sitting on the other side. And the domestic team says to the President, appropriately, if you don't start healthcare today, every day you go by is a day you can't get healthcare done. And if you look at the history of getting healthcare, accurate. The economic team is, whatever you do, don't rock the boat, don't, et cetera. They weren't crazy about healthcare, they weren't crazy about financial reform, they didn't want to. Myself, David, the political people, I wanted to do financial reform because I thought the political system needed Old Testament justice. They needed to see a banker on the South Lawn and just slap him across the head. And I say that because people lost...
The anger with the AIG bonuses was extraordinary, right?
Tea Party. People, if you do health care, the interests have to be on your side of the table. You do financial reform and insurance reform, they're on the other side of the table. And they needed, the American people, post the Recovery Act, post-TARP, need to see you fighting the very people that made them lose their home. Now, he gets 307 electoral votes. He gets to make this decision. To his great credit, we have this long, long meeting, et cetera. Now, we got universal health care. We also got the Tea Party, okay? So in politics, sometimes, you know, and I happen to think as a son of a pediatrician, and I know you all thought I was going to say something else, but as a son of a pediatrician, there's a lot, and somebody who helped not only pass that, but also for President Clinton passed the health insurance for 10 million children that didn't have any health care. That is an incredibly valuable peace of mind, that a parent doesn't have to stay up at night worrying about whether their child is going to get covered. On the other hand, our political system, I think in the last 25 years, the Iraq war, the financial meltdown, China and the not abiding by the WTO, and COVID fuel this massive anger and fuel also that the elite live with one system and everybody else is left to pick up and pay the bill for the elite. And had we taken on the banks, I think we would have diffused what has become an explosive political bomb. So when you ask me what, I mean, again, and I want to say this, the president did the right thing, which is get a bunch of people who had different views together, had a real discussion. And, you know, as I always say in the mayor's office, the only choices you get in that office are bad and worse. And you have to make the judgment between bad and worse. And he made a decision, and there's thousands and millions of people in America today have health care. We also have a thing called Tea Party, and it exploded in our political system, and we're still dealing with the ramifications and the aftershocks afterwards.
No, and you spend as many decades fighting the fight as you have, you're going to have some second thoughts, there's no question.
Let me go back to Clinton on the same subject, healthcare. Now, I'm doing assault weapon ban. I did welfare reform, other things. People forget this, but Senator Packwood and Senator Dole walk in and they say, we'll agree with your entire healthcare plan, but we want an individual mandate, not a universal mandate. It was over a mandate. Does anybody remember that? No. And we said no.
So I'm going to give last question before we go. How do you think the United States can rebuild trust with its allies around the world?
I've been in the Oval Office, and I don't want to scare you. There's no reset button in the Resolute desk. You don't get a ding. You have to appreciate.
There is, but it just brings a Diet Coke.
Yeah. That's a box, and it's right there. I want everybody to appreciate, you know, that a lot of people quote Prime Minister Carney, but don't understand what he meant, the full value of rupture.
The rupture.
It's not.
Speech at Davos.
Yeah, there is no super glue to reassemble this. This thing is broken. What I try to do by talk about region and different things, the United States has four, not limited to, but four big tools in its toolbox: economic statecraft, military power, political persuasion, and cultural attraction. Each region requires assembling those slightly different. What you would do with Latin America is not what you would do vis-a-vis China or what you would do in Europe. By way of illustrating, like in Europe, I would say reform and modernize. Whatever's west of the Rhine River and not nailed down, move it east into Poland, Romania, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia. You got to create a new level of credible deterrence. To the gray zone attacks on Europe, here's the protocol from NATO. You touch one country, you blow up a utility, et cetera, you do cyber. This is going to be the NATO response. And I'd also then engage Europe on a supply chain economic engagement and an agreement together as a EU and the United States. But the goal of trust and the credibility is going to take a generation, and it's going to take consistency. It's not going to take one president, one term. What we built, and it's not coming back, it's broken, over 70 plus years, through World War II, through post-World War II, et cetera, was a credibility in America. Now that we have done what we've done in the last, not just in the last 14 months, but over the, both in the president's first term and second term, is break that point to our dearest, our neighbor, our friend, said it's a rupture. So it's going to take a generation. We started, and let's circle back where we started. America's strength, one of, is that we have friends and allies. When you degrade them and belittle them to their face, and then you find out your pants are hanging around your ankles, they're not going to come pull your pants up for you, Mr. President. That's why you don't do that to allies and friends. Because sometimes, like on 9/11, you need them. Sometimes you have to be there for them. That's what friends are for. You don't get to call on them only for yourself. And there are core pieces that we have to do to show up and earn that trust back. Now, I will say this again, having been ambassador in a way. Don't underestimate the power of America as America. We still are the place that people will cross the Pacific, the Atlantic, the Rio, and the Mississippi to get to, because we still offer a better tomorrow than yesterday. We have incredible strengths in this country. We have been living on fumes as a country, but don't underestimate how strong the American pull and how strong America freedom is as a gravitational pull that takes people and grabs them by their heart.
Ladies and gentlemen, Rahm Emanuel. That's it for today's edition of the GZERO World Podcast. Why not make it official? Why don't you rate and review GZERO World? 5 stars, only 5 stars, otherwise don't do it. On Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Tell your friends.
The GZERO World Podcast is brought to you by our lead sponsor, Prologis. Prologis helps businesses across the globe scale their supply chains with an expansive portfolio of logistics real estate and the only end-to-end solutions platform addressing the critical initiatives of global logistics today. Learn more at prologis.com.